On today's Locked On Bucks, we continue to bask in the glory of the opening night win against the Philadelphia 76ers. What can we really take away from that game and expect to see going forward for the Bucks? Some more updates on Khris Middleton and a new court that we will see the Bucks using this season. All of that and more coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day. And now, your favorite podcast is also a newsletter. We introduce the Locked On Bucks daily newsletter, your one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage, delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com, lockedondaily.com, and start your day with all the new free Locked On Bucks newsletters. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get a big return on FanDuel when you place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Camille, I know you and Frank broke it down last night. The season opening win for the Bucks. Well, Wednesday night, as the days just bleed together now that we're in the season. But I figured, why not continue to look back at that game and just relish everything that went well for the Bucks, even though we caution, look, don't take too much away from one game in October. But it is nice when your team wins, that you can take in all the clips on SportsCenter, the highlights, listen to all the podcasts, read all the articles, go to the NBA subreddit, all things you typically tend to avoid after Bucks losses. But before we get to what stood out the most and some more takeaways from that game, I thought it was pretty interesting just to hear, maybe not backpedaling, the right way to put it, but more talk of, did we maybe take the Bucks for granted? And a few prominent NBA voices have always kind of been there to say, look, the only hesitation I have is, can they be healthy? But you started to hear a lot more of, wow, look what the Bucks did.
A lot more of that. Like, they were I'll say they were hedging. They were like, oh wait, hold on, let's make sure we give the Bucks some credit. And I was sitting there like, y'all stay over there. Y'all can stay over there. We don't need the accolades. We don't need the applause from y'all. We heard how y'all felt coming into the season, ranking the Bucks as low as 5th, some places 6th, seventh in the East. Like, no, y'all can stay over there with that energy. But all in all, I mean, it is just one game out of the 82, so we do have to keep that in context. But I got to say, seeing that already was kind of like, this is the optimism that we've been talking about all offseason about why we're high on this Milwaukee Bucks team. And this is just the start. This is the start of what they can become, and the outlines of it look really promising.
Like I mentioned, you and Frank broke it down. I did on my own post-game show as well. I think we had similar takeaways of, number one, I mean, this is a Brook Lopez podcast, so it felt pretty good. All that stock that we never sold, seeing Brook's performance there, hearing Doc Rivers after the game too, with the Brook, you're a bleeping monster. He was magnificent. I think you could make a case that Brook Lopez was the second best player on the floor for the Bucks last night in a game that involves Giannis and Damian Lillard and Taurean Prince doing what he did in his Bucks debut. But just up and down that list, you couldn't find one player that you looked at and said, didn't really have a great game, but thankfully this player offset it. Everybody on the team, I thought, had a very good game last night.
He did. He didn't shoot the ball well. And I have seen some people questioning Brook Lopez's shot selection, which to me, I'm like, I wouldn't go there at this point. I mean, he's been a 36% three-point shooter at least for the last 3 years or so. So like, he has a green light. He can pull those shots. And we have seen him knock down some very deep threes. Now, there might be some who just don't have an appetite for seeing a big, regardless of such, taking those types of shots. And there might have been one or two that Brook took where I'm like, don't know if that was the best look for you.
Right.
But overall, like, I don't have a problem with Brook shooting those shots. We know he can make them. They just didn't fall for him yesterday. But yet and still, with those shots not falling, he was able to make a big offensive impact with his screening, with his assist. Like, he was really good yesterday on both sides of the ball. You just kind of wished that the numbers would have reflected that a little bit better with some of those shots falling for him.
Honestly, if that's what we can expect from him, where it's a Brook scores like 8 to 10 points and he's just oh man, Brook hit a 3, that was timely, I'll take it. If it's we're relying on you for defense, and we've seen some of the blueprints for this defense. We talked about it throughout the preseason too, and we wondered, can we look at the Cavs and say this is going to be the model for how this defense is constructed, not only because of Greg Buckner coming from there, but just the makeup of that team. When you think about two bigs with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, and I think most people would say the Cavaliers have better wing defenders than the Bucks. I would say that too. I think we all, but it's not like they're the Celtics or the Knicks. That there are some holes you can pick at on the perimeter there for the Cavs, and that's where the comp comes into play. Of we have two bigs like that too. We think Giannis is a better defender than Evan Mobley is, at least at this point. Jarrett Allen and Brook Lopez, both very good rim protectors. I'd still take Brook over him. Maybe Jarrett Allen has more mobility, but still, yeah, I can see some things line up there that maybe Greg Buckner can figure out ways to make the perimeter defense look better than it actually is. And, one way to really help that is what we saw from Gary Trent Jr. And we talked about, look, there are certain segments of Bucks fans that, even though it's one game, can take victory laps today and all through the weekend. And that is the group that stood there behind Brook Lopez and said, look, there's no trade that makes sense. We need this guy to be where we want to get to. And the group that said, I don't care what the national media thinks about these players individually. The three guys the Bucks signed are very clear upgrades over who they're replacing. And two of those three especially stood out big time. Obviously, the offense that you saw from Taurean Prince, but the defense as well and what he gave you. But Gary Trent Jr., look, I don't expect Gary Trent Jr. to be locking down Tyrese Maxey every single night. And lockdown is probably a bit strong to put it. But he was connected to him all night. And I thought he masterfully navigated screens that you look at what Gary Trent gave you and you think that's what was missing last year. That's what we definitely did not have on the perimeter.
It's what we talked about so many times with the point of attack defense, putting Brook in positions where he's under attack and really not able, to really be that defensive anchor that we've seen. Like with Gary Trent Jr. and the physicality that he brought to the point of attack, really being able to body Maxey, being able to force Maxey in the right direction. They're not trying to give up middle. They're trying to funnel them to Brook on the sideline. So it's like, it was a breath of fresh air. Again, it's one game. It's 1 out of 82, but you see the tools there, which is what makes you excited going forward, especially against somebody like Tyrese Maxey, who has a crazy blend of speed. Like, he is a very shifty guard, small, with like 6'2", really, really fast, has a great touch around the rim. And the guards did a great job on him, Gary Trent Jr. in particular, of just making it difficult for him. And if you can do that with the smaller, speedy guards, it's going to help a lot. And I'm really curious. I think Frank mentioned it yesterday, but just like seeing Trent against other types of wing players and guards and seeing how he defends, some guys that might be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, rely more on the float game instead of trying to get the layup so much. Not much of an inside out guy, but what happens when it's a midi guy, but just seeing how he defends different types of guards will be interesting. But I already have way more faith in that than what we saw last year with Malik Beasley in the same assignment.
Well, and I know you and Frank talked about that part too of, man, what a rough ask to say, okay, first game in a Bucks uniform, take on Tyrese Maxey. And it looks different if Joel Embiid and or Paul George are out there. We get that. But still, we didn't see anything like that last year from the two guard that the Bucks were throwing out there, or two guards that the Bucks were throwing out there on the defensive end. And I'm curious to see that as well, of when some of those matchups start to stack up. Obviously Monday, when you have the Boston Celtics, that's going to be a massive test to see how it holds up. but he has done pretty well against bigger guys. I mean, Frank was bringing up and trying to remember what series
It
was
was
it,
the
or
bubble
it
for
was the
LeBron.
bubble, yeah, when he took
Yep.
on LeBron James. So he's done that before. So now I'm curious to see how he can continue to evolve defensively with this group. More to get to, not to just completely rehash yesterday or Wednesday's season opening win, but there's two very important names we didn't really mention yet, and they need to be mentioned. So we'll do that. The latest on Khris Middleton as well. It's not unexpected, but I'm sure it's very disappointing news for the Bucks home opener later on today against the Chicago Bulls. Camille and I will get into that conversation coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Well, time to talk to you now about our friends over at Prize Picks. And look, Prize Picks, you've heard us mention them quite a bit. One of the more fun ways to get in on the action when you're out there. Can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. It's the best way to get in on that action in over 30 states out there. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. Don't even have to win. You get a $50 bonus just for playing that $5 guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Every Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. It's the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going to go off? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Locked On NBA is that promo code to use and get your $50 instantly when you play your first lineup. Head over to prizepicks.com to get started. So the two names that we did not mention yet, Camille, are obviously Damian Lillard and Giannis. And just as Frank mentioned, I think we all kind of felt that way I really hope Tyrese Maxey doesn't outplay Damian Lillard, and we have to hear more of that narrative and that conversation. But it was big for Dame too. Again, it's one game. We're going to keep repeating that. But, as we mentioned, all the talk that we heard through the offseason, that's great. And you can explain it all. And look, we believe you. And we've kind of mentioned, okay, here's some of the logic behind all of it. Here's why we saw what we did. Here's why we're buying in and think it's going to look differently this year. But you got to hold up your end of the bargain. And last night, he looked every bit the guy we expect him to be this year.
Far more comfortable. It didn't look like he was out of place, like he was able to take his time. He looked like he was in great shape. He was getting the shots that he wanted. He was walking into them confidently. That's what you want to see from Dame. Like you mentioned it, Justin, it's stuck in my head ever since you said it over the summer, where you were like, there's not certain numbers that I'm looking for from Damian Lillard. Like I'll know it when I see it. Like my eyes will tell me this is what I signed up for. This is the Damian Lillard experience I thought we were going to get. And you saw it. Yeah. I was like, oh, this looks like Dame. Like in that third quarter in particular, I was just like, he's getting really comfortable. He's in a great rhythm. And the threes were falling for him. He was getting where he wanted to on the court. Guys were dying on screens, trying to get around Brook Lopez multiple times. It was just a really good flow for him in this game. And for Giannis, it was one of those ones where you're like, okay, he's 8 of 11 from the field, very efficient, not that many shots, although take that back. It was a lot of shots. He got fouled a lot as well. So the stat line could have looked different if those fouls weren't called or if, he was able to drop those in. But it was a good night for the Bucks superstars to come out of there. Really efficient games, looking good. For Giannis, you can still see some rust on him a little bit. But overall, like I don't have many complaints, period, coming out of this game outside of the defensive rebounding, which everybody on the Bucks already, they've acknowledged, they understand they have to be better and stronger in that area. But for Dame and for Giannis, great starts. And I love that Giannis only played 31 minutes. Would like to see Dame's number a little bit lower against Chicago, but all in all, like great start.
Well, and that was the other thing is, we mentioned, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a reduction in games. Like, well, they're not going to be eligible for individual awards because they're not going to hit the games played threshold. I assume it's more going to be the minutes, in that the minutes per game come down a little bit, or when you have the opportunity, it's we don't need to play you past 26 minutes tonight. Like, we're good. You can sit for the rest of this one. You started to see that with Giannis. I think it was just the way things were going, and especially the comfort that Dame was getting into from the second quarter on. Some of those actions with Brook Lopez, it was almost like you were watching Dame 5 years ago with Yusuf Nurkic setting screens for him. So that was encouraging. But, when you mention the free throws for Giannis, that was another encouraging thing to me, because Joe Dumars and a few others in the league office have basically said, yeah, it's going to be the same as we officiated from February on, maybe even a little tighter this year. So part of you thought, what's that going to look like for somebody like Dame, who was one of the guys, not that he's a foul grifter, but was one of the guys that really benefited from that. And Giannis and Dame got to the line 23 times yesterday. So Giannis, I didn't think forced anything. He picked his matchups. So I've talked about it with somebody else last night who was kind of upset's probably the wrong word, but it was more like, I wish Giannis wouldn't just keep ramming it into the lane and trying to do that. And look, the first drive that he had of the game too, with I don't know what in the world Kelly Oubre was doing on that defense, but when Giannis went down, you thought, let's not see many more of these. But I thought Giannis was masterful in picking his spots. And my point to that person too was, well, I know you want him to kick it out, but if you're Giannis and you see there's no Joel Embiid, there's no Paul George as a help defender on the perimeter, and you start to go downhill and you see it's Kelly Oubre in front of me, it's KJ Martin in front of me. It's Gerson Yabusele. Yes, I'm going to keep pressing forward and get to the lane here. So I thought that was big. And Dame getting to the line 6 times as well. Very encouraging start to me. And, the last thing I think to touch on with Giannis too is one of the other refrains that we heard a lot in the summer was, why can't Giannis play like he does in FIBA? Why can't he be the traditional big and do some of those things that we saw? Giannis talked about everything he learned from Kill Bill and playing for Team Greece in the Olympics. I don't expect Giannis to be the complimentary guy and just, I'm going to take a backseat to Damian Lillard. But you saw a lot of that last night where he was, okay, go get it, Dame. I know you got this matchup, and I'm just going to come over here, 2 or 3 times. We even saw the Giannis and Dame 2-man game. That was the most impressive part of all of it to me, that there was no your turn, my turn. It was just, let's do this because this works.
They took what they saw. Like, nothing was really forced, especially for Giannis, which takes a certain degree of maturity and understanding of the game itself to be like, I'm not going to force myself. I see the mismatches, but if they're playing me this way, I'm going to make this particular pass. Or I see that Dame is in a rhythm right now. Let's find a way to get him the ball. Like, it was just a really smart game of basketball from Giannis where he didn't have to force himself on the game. He was able to let the game come to him and still dictate his play on the 76ers, because as we mentioned, there was a huge size advantage. And I love seeing how the Bucks took advantage of their size and the physicality that they had over the Sixers. There was a possession, I can't recall if it was Bucks film room or Bucks breakdown on Twitter who called this particular play out. But it's when
I think
Bobby checks in the game and it's Council in the game, and they know Council's on Bobby, and Dame's looking like, hey, like, we got to get you the ball. Like, they acknowledged it immediately. Like, there is going to be a mismatch and let's take advantage of it. That's another area. Last year, sometimes we'd be like, okay, guys, why aren't we just dumping it down to Brook or to Bobby in the situation, or to Giannis, and letting them cook on this mismatch? And you saw them doing a much better job of identifying that and just trying to play out of it, even though the Sixers started double teaming out of the post when that started happening in the second half a lot more. It was just refreshing to see them like, hey, this is how the game is being played. This is what they're trying to dictate on us. So let's take advantage of this over here because this is how they're playing us. So I love that entire aspect of it. And the Bucks really leaning into trying to be a bigger, more physical team, which Doc talked about last year, but it looks like it's more seamless. Like, it's more confident in their ability to use their size and their advantage this season so far.
It's like you're 2 months into the job now. If you start a new job and you're asking for help, or like, what do I have to do for this? And what does this mean? And now the best analogy I can think of is, you've been there 3 months where, like, I know how to find everything. I know where this is. That's kind of the comfort that it felt like we were seeing from this team last night. There's one other thing I think is really worth pointing out. And then obviously the news on Khris Middleton. He is not going to play in the home opener against the Chicago Bulls. It's not time to have the "are you concerned about Khris Middleton" conversation quite yet, but certainly disappointing that we won't get a chance to see this group at full strength just yet. So we'll get into that conversation. What that other very encouraging thing, at least to me, that we saw from the Bucks was in the season opening win against the Sixers. We'll get into that after this on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about our friends over at FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, and do it all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. To get started, simply head over to FanDuel.com. So that other very encouraging thing to me from the game, and we've just almost turned this into a full-blown game recap part 2, but the last thing that I have to say was, the other encouraging thing that I took away from it was there were no moments where you were like, what's going on here? This doesn't look crisp. It's the Bucks playing with their food. How are the Sixers clawing back into this game? I mean, you could be frustrated over the rebounding that you referenced in the first quarter, but after that, they cleaned it up. I mean, Andre Drummond had 10 rebounds early. I think the Sixers had 10 offensive rebounds through the first 14 or 15 minutes, and they finished with 17. So those numbers got much better, and they did a better job as the game went on. But really, in that second quarter, once they started to pull away and build up that double-digit lead, they never looked back. I mean, Philly had minor runs, but there was never a moment where you thought, this is big. You got to come up with a stop here, or Philly's right back in it.
Yeah, the thing that was keeping them in it were the offensive rebounds. So once you start cleaning that up a bit, it helps. And then you were seeing the 76ers going down and taking quick shots in the shot clock. Bucks are getting the rebound, being able to go back the other way and continue to build their lead, which was encouraging to see. Doc Rivers talked about it in, I think, Media Day or one of the training camp pressers, where he was just like, we're trying to get there healthy. But we want to dominate along the way there. We want to be good in the regular season. We want to take this serious. You heard it before game. I believe it was Dame doing the pre-huddle hype up for the team, and just it's about us. It is about us. We need to go out there and this is the first of 82. We got to go out there and establish ourselves. It's about us, which is why when people are like, oh, well, the Bucks won handily, but there was no Embiid, there was no Paul George, it doesn't matter. I'm like, well, one, there was no Khris Middleton, but also if that is the case, then the Bucks did exactly what you would expect them to do. So they shouldn't get slighted for taking care of business when it's a team that we saw last season falter in moments when it was time.
Yeah, that's a game they lose last season.
Yes, it is. So this is an encouraging start for this team. So I'm all on board for it. Again, coming out of the first game, you don't know what to expect. You don't want to take too much of it. But what I continue to feel like and just say is it's a good first step. It's a great building place. And you can see the reasons of optimism that we had over the summer with the pieces and how they performed in that very first game. You hope to see them stack that against Chicago and then against Brooklyn. So you don't want to come out, have that great win against Philly, and then, crap the bed afterwards against some poorer competition.
And you mentioned there's no Joel Embiid, no Paul George either. There's not going to be Joel Embiid or Paul George until at least October 30th. As we just learned, neither of those two players are going to play in the 2-game road trip that Philly has coming up here. So I don't want to make too much over 1 out of 82 games, but, stack wins while you can, because as we've said, the Eastern Conference is loaded. It's going to be tougher than it's been in recent years. It was already starting to get there last year, but we think it's even more top heavy this year. So add those W's into the win column, because they can't take them away from you. And it could be the difference in a 3 seed versus a 4 seed, a 2 seed versus a 3 seed, and so on, or God forbid, avoiding the play-in tournament. So that's the other reason why that was big. I mentioned that Embiid and Paul George are both going to be out through this road trip for Philly. And as we just said, Khris Middleton is going to be out at least the game tonight against the Bulls. Who knows? I mean, I think it's realistic to assume you have a Sunday, Monday back-to-back, your first of the season in Brooklyn and in Boston. So at best, we're going to see Khris Middleton in 1 out of the first 4 games to start the season, if that. But it's not a big deal if you continue to play the way that you did against Philly. And that was the other thing, Camille, was seeing Taurean Prince. Look, we're not denying you need Khris Middleton for the playoffs. Like, this team's in a better spot. They're not going to compete for a championship, I don't think, if they don't have all 3 of those guys. All 4. Let's not stop short of including Brook. If they don't have all 4 of those guys. But again, one of the massive differences is we talked about watching Gary Trent defensively versus watching Malik Beasley, our guy last year, seeing Taurean Prince out there. This guy is more than capable of filling in and being, I guess, essentially your 6th man. If he's going to start for Khris Middleton when Khris can't play, and then, once Khris is back, assume the role of one of your main cogs off the bench. You had a nice run for 3 weeks last year with Jay Crowder. After the injury, it was just never the same. So you couldn't have expected that from Jay. That's another massive boost for this team.
It is, and I'm looking forward to seeing Taurean Prince continue his play because the defense that he brings as well with his size, like, it is, again, another physical point of attack defender, and he's somebody who's going to be hounding his opposition. He's going to be in the passing lanes. He's going to be trying to get a deflection as well. So I love that Taurean Prince pickup. We talked about it over the summer as well, of like, I'm here for it and what it can unlock. I was wondering if we might see that small ball lineup last night against the 76ers, given their size, and seeing Giannis at the 5 with Prince next to him, but I don't recall seeing that look.
I don't remember it, and I'm sure it was, let's just overpower this team.
Yeah, like, that's the route that they went instead, which is like, that is cool. So, like, again, I love the versatility and the options that you have with Prince out there as well, and I do wonder for the game tonight, I should say, since it's airing on Friday against the Bulls, like that Zach LaVine cover and what that looks like for him, because there's been so much noise and accolade, and which it should be, and applause around Lonzo Ball's return, because it's been 2.5 years dang near.
Who is out, by the way.
Yes, he is out tomorrow, but the Bulls' first game was also Zach LaVine's first game since January. So, like, he's getting back into the flow of things. We know Zach LaVine can go off really quickly once he's hot. So, like, seeing how Taurean Prince can get that matchup as well, or if they even let Gary Trent Jr. check him a few times.
Yeah, or if it's Gary Trent. And that's the other thing is, like, we wondered, will we see this small ball lineup because of Philly? But I love what Doc Rivers did. Like, no, we're playing our style. Like, we're not changing unless you make us change. So if it becomes a track meet where we have to maybe look into trying this out, then I'll consider it. Otherwise, no, we're going to be the bigger, more physical team outside of the first 12 or so minutes when rebounding was an issue. I think they were all night long. We also learned the new courts for the NBA Cup this upcoming year. And it's they're similar to what they were a year ago. So if you're watching the YouTube stream, you can see what we've put up here. And if you're listening to the podcast, I'm assuming you've seen visuals of the court by now. But you like the accents of the antler horns that they have. It is a blue court, which seems to softly confirm the leaked City Edition jerseys that we saw over the summer. Although that's going to be very interesting to see a very, very blue jersey on top of a blue court. You're going to get shades of Boise State with that. But I don't know. I saw some people complaining over, like, why is it blue? Blue has been a secondary color for this team for 7 or 8 years now. So
since they adopted the scheme.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the overall package for this Bucks team. I like that we don't have the racing stripe down the middle of the court this year. And, it has hints of the Fear to the Deer jerseys that they won the championship in as well, which I really like. Yeah,
same here. And I think that the teams are going to be wearing their statement edition jerseys this year for the NBA Cup.
It's not blue on blue. Yeah.
So I think it's the black ones for the Bucks, which I think will look really clean on the blue court with that black accent. The overall design of the NBA Cup courts this year, I look better rather than the theme last year with the stripes down the middle. This year, they're prioritizing the circles. So the Bucks one is hard to see, but there is a second bigger circle around the darker blue one in the middle. But it's shaded really nicely. But I'm a big fan of this particular court. I love the gold accents. I love the NBA Cup courts, period, because the courts make you tune in and realize, hey, this is different.
I'm watching
like,
one of
what
these
is this?
games.
Yeah, like I love that about this. So I'm looking forward to it. And from what I've read about the design behind the courts this year, they should be less slippery for the players, which was their number one complaint last year. They didn't like sliding on all the paint. It should feel better for them. And
How
then,
far?
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, how far away do you think we are from? Did you see? And they're not going to use this in a game. It was just for whatever it's even called, basically the equivalent to Midnight Madness. But did you see Kentucky, what they did for their court, where it was an all LED court that would light up with threes and how far away are we from something like that coming to the NBA?
I think that might be like I can see that being an all-star thing where you get like these interactive courts. And last thing on NBA Cup court, they said that they use NBA 2K as well to test out the courts just to see what it might look like from a broadcast. And I'm like, if it's in the game,
did they turn on the headsets and listen to the kids that are playing them too?
But I was like, hey, look at NBA 2K being helpful in the designs. They also use like the panels and laying them out on actual courts and looking at it and everything like that. But when I saw 2K was used, I said, okay, shout out to the game.
It should be interesting to see tonight, the home opener against the Chicago Bulls. As we mentioned, no Khris Middleton, no Lonzo Ball either. But look, this is one of those games that you should win. And as we saw, 15-point win on the road against granted undermanned Philadelphia team. That team, no disrespect to the Bulls, but with Tyrese Maxey and the offensive off-season additions they made, even without Embiid and Paul George, that team is better, I think, than this Chicago Bulls team you're going to see. So I expect to see more of that. And that's going to be, I don't want to take too much from it, but potentially a big tell, as what we just said of, hey, the Bucks didn't play with their food. They were focused. They executed. They moved without the ball offensively. Speaking of, Camille, we didn't even mention the whipping boy. Pat Connaughton was very good in that game too. So this is the thing now. Great. Do it again. And let's start to build those habits and foundations and build that consistency.
Absolutely. And this is a Bulls team that against the Pelicans, they were just overmatched and just over exerted when it came to trying to take care of the ball. Yeah. I think they had like 20 plus turnovers against the Bull or against the Pelicans. So like it's a team that you can get some turnovers, you can force your will on them. They were dying on screens against the Pelicans. So a lot of the things that we saw in their opening game, I'm really curious to see how the Bucks can take advantage of that. And all in all, just win. Like let's continue the good momentum and taking care of business and not playing with your food, because after the Bulls and the Nets, you have the Celtics. So like let's bank these wins and let's get to it.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be Giannis seeing Patrick Williams again, and we've seen how that has traditionally gone in the past. So this may be the Giannis 30-point game coming up later on tonight against the Bulls. Quickly as we wrap up here, did you get a chance to see any of the other games last? I know it was a busy night with the post game and everything else, but our first full night of an NBA schedule, because I got to tell you, coming home and like, oh yeah, there's still basketball on, was the best part, and getting to see the last quarter or so of that Suns Clippers game and just seeing what the Intuit Dome looks like.
That arena looks absolutely bananas. Like I have to find a way to go to that arena when the Bucks are there.
Did you see the halo that they call it, that goes the scoreboard that goes all the way around? Did you see what they did for the t-shirt toss?
I did not.
So it's video that plays on the halo of Clippers players basically mimicking jump shots, and then the t-shirts come out from that.
That's crazy. No, I got to get there. I have to get there. I'm going to be on Game Time trying to find me some tickets to a Clippers Bucks game.
You got to find a way to get there, because I saw somebody point out parking.
It was like $70. I saw.
It was like $75 to park.
Uber, please.
But yeah, congrats to Bud too, who won his first game for the hometown team, the Phoenix Suns. And again, we've seen, and we were in a part of a chat where somebody else pointed out the same too. I don't know what it is about leaving Wisconsin, what it does for your health, but man, Mike Budenholzer just looks terrific now.
He looks fantastic because that was the first time I really got to see him. You
Yeah.
mentioned like, man, he's lost a lot of weight. When I saw him, I was like, dang, bud. Like, okay,
Yeah, and
I
it's not as if
see.
Bud was, like, morbidly obese, but when you look at him, you're
Right.
like,
But
"Man,
he's like
you look."
lean, like
Yeah,
cut,
like, "You
like
look terrific."
right. He really does though. When they got their first win, probably like the most exciting game
Yeah.
last night was that Clippers Suns game, and it came down to the wire with James Harden just losing the handle a little bit, missing some free throws down the stretch. But that was a fun.
Grayson
It was a
Allen
fun ass
saves
ball.
the day.
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that the Houston or not Houston, yeah, Houston lost to Charlotte.
Yeah, yeah.
Charlotte was down by like 18, and then here comes LaMelo Ball and Trey Mann just doing their thing. Where it was like, this is going to be fun to watch. I can't wait to keep watching basketball tonight, even.
Yeah, you were, it was almost like, what year is it? Bud is on the sidelines. It's Harden going head to head with Kevin Durant. Like,
Right.
wow, we've teleported back to 2017. Bucks and the Chicago Bulls coming up later on tonight. So hopefully the Bucks can push it to 2-0. And that's the last thing to wrap with here is we've touched on, yeah, it's disappointing that you don't have Khris Middleton. We mentioned coming up, you got the Boston Celtics already in just a couple of days, going to play them on Monday.
Mhm.
But the 3 games you had leading into that, the 76ers who are undermanned. Now you have the Bulls that you should expect to win that game. Then you have the Brooklyn Nets. And granted, it's going to be a back-to-back, but you got a very good chance here to come out of the gates strong before Boston and then Memphis on the road. But again, just build that consistency
Yep.
because those 3 games, that's kind of the on-ramp for this team. And then we just mentioned Celtics, Memphis Grizzlies, a big one with the Cavs. I think it's 2 straight with the Cavaliers. So there's some early tests on this
Yeah.
schedule for the Bucks.
So take care of business while you can, because once the cop continues to go up, it's going to continue to rise. And we've talked about too, just how the Bucks end this season, like their March schedule is brutal. So like what you're doing in October and November and December, it all matters. Like
Yeah.
all of this matters, y'all, all 82. So like, let's get those wins when we can.
Bucks and the Bulls later on tonight. And as we mentioned, a couple of big ones next week that we look forward to breaking down. That'll do it for today's show, though. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you next time on Locked On Bucks.